Hello, I'm Spurrier.
And I'm Charlie Adlard.
Welcome to Forbidden Planet TV.
Welcome to Forbidden Planet TV. I'm Andrew Sumner. I have two returning guests of the highest caliber. It is none other than Damn Them All creators, Charlie Adlard and Simon Spurrier. How are you guys?
Very well, thank you.
I've got to say, you guys look great. Completely unchanged since the last time we met.
Yeah, I've been in these clothes for weeks.
Yeah.
I went and put them back on specially. They've been in a cabinet just waiting for the return.
And I appreciate that. That's why I always wear the same gear in every episode of the show. So last time around, we were talking about Damn Them All issue 1, a spectacular comic book, a great piece of work from the guys here, which is available for pre-order from the links attached to this conversation. And also to Simon and Charlie's upcoming visit to Forbidden Planet London, 179 Shaftesbury Avenue, on the 29th of October at 1 p.m. To sign issues of the debut issue of Boom's Damn Them All. But here, what I'm interested in asking you guys about is, what have you been reading or appreciating in the comic space recently?
Well, the first thing to say is I get no time to read. So it's going to be a difficult one for me to dredge up. The things that I tend to read are therefore the things that friends tend to send me. Yeah. So my answers will inevitably smack of nepotism.
That's what we want, mate. That's good.
Yeah, no, well, okay. So, for instance, Chris Cantwell, I rate very highly as a writer, sent me his new series, Briar, which, is it Briar Rose or just Briar? Anyway, you'll find it if you look up Briar, which is another Boom story, which I think is just exceptional. He's a big fan of Coda, which I did with Matthias Bergara a few years ago, which is sort of how we came to speak to one another. And he loves that idea of dark fantasy being subverted, taking your expectations of fantasy and then flipping them on their head and saying something very valuable about the contemporary world we inhabit. And Briar absolutely does that. What else have I read recently? John Harris Dunning did a book called Swiper at Dark Horse. I don't know if it's out yet, but if it isn't, wait for it. It's really, really great. It's got this very clever central conceit. I don't think it's giving too much away. It's the idea that if you're a private detective in the future, your exclusivity, your hireability depends upon the fact that you delete secrets as soon as you have found them from your mind, so that the best private detectives in the future are those who, in between every case, undergo a complete brain wipe. So they're constantly starting from zero. It's a brilliant and very cool hard sci-fi idea. And he just sort of runs and runs with it. So I'm very fond of that. I will always read anything by Alex Packnadell, who I think is one of the really important up-and-coming voices. 2000 AD continues to be extraordinary.
What have you enjoyed in 2000 AD recently? I
mean, I get the weekly comic delivered, so I will always go for Dread. Dread will always be my cup of tea. I sort of dip in and out of the rest of it. I'm a big fan of Thistlebone.
Did you read Skip Tracer?
No, I didn't. That's on the list. That's
Skip Tracer is pretty good. Yeah. In fact, I think James Peters just concluded that.
Great.
After quite a long run. Yeah.
Well, that's the trick at the moment, is not having much time to sort of read episodically. I like to wait for things to be in one place so I can do it all at once. So that's the big get for me, is something that's complete and contained. What else have I read recently? I've been doing lots of Toppy. Old Toppy collections, which are slowly trickling out in the English language, which are mind-blowing. I'll stop waffling now because I'm struggling to think of
Charlie, I could see that 2000 AD gave you a bit of a trigger.
Well, only because I finally caught up with reading Brink, Dan Abnett and Ian Kubard's Brink, which I got collected, again, similar to Si. I get sent 2000 AD every week. And it's just, my brain cannot cope with reading 5-6 pages, and then it's like me watching a TV show. You know, I have to watch it in a mass, otherwise I'll forget. You know, I'm 56, for crying out loud. I will forget in between, no matter how good it is, I will forget stuff. So it's much easier to read it as a collected thing. And I've just read the first 2 volumes, which are brilliant. I love it. I'm now regretting not reading it in the comic, because now somehow I've got to wait for them to collect the next 2, you know, books in another collection, so I can see what happens after that. So I absolutely adore that show. It does read like a TV show, as Dan's admitted. So yeah, I won't regret saying it was a show. I'd let me at least first off mention John as well. With it was Wiper side, not Swiper.
Oh crap! Sorry.
Oh, that makes sense now. Given your description, makes complete sense.
Yeah.
All day.
And to get John off my back, I'll mention how good it is as well. What else have I been reading? Brink has definitely been, you know, sort of at the top of my list of recent months, reading that. I have been enjoying everything that James Tynion has written of late.
Yeah.
He's
by the way, I found out when I spoke to him recently that he pronounces it Tynan.
Tynan.
Yeah. Tynan. Right. Yeah, he pronounces it Tynan, which I didn't know either. It's only when he corrected me. Yeah.
Well, it's just because he's got Tiny Onion.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I met him actually at last year's Thought Bubble, which was nice. We had a good chat. But
he's a good bloke, isn't he? He's
a nice guy. But I've absolutely adored Something's Killing the Children.
Oh man. I mean, yeah, it's great.
The Nice House by the Lake is artistically, again, my sweet spot, because it's got that brilliant sort of 60s, 70s illustrative quality, which I love. I mean, I love people like Bob Peake, Bernie Fuchs, all the classic American sort of illustrators of that period, and that book just hits that spot completely. So I've loved that, and I've been really enjoying The Closet as well. That's just been coming out. So those have been good reads. But, you know, similar to Si, I don't seem to have the time that much to read, even though my kids are older and are dimly aware that I'm alive now. I don't know, just life seems to get in the way quite often. And again, I know it's a terrible excuse, but it's age. I have to find time to physically sit down in a quiet space for a good hour or something to really absorb things like that. If I'm, you know, I'll go to bed, I'll read at night, and I'm asleep within 2 pages of a comic. I tend to choose comics to read in bed because they are much lighter when they fall on your face rather than a novel. So, but it's the frustration of that, you know. I can't think of anything. I'd like to phrase the question in a slightly different way, which is for people who are watching Forbidden Planet TV and are thinking, oh man, you know, I want to pull the string back onto comics history and pick up some archive editions or you know, pick up collections of classic stuff. What has been in terms of classic comics, what has been influential upon the both of you? What would you recommend? Asterix. That's a great choice. Yeah. I still collect it to this day. I think the new team, it sounds crazy to say that, on Asterix, I think each book's getting better and better. It got off to a real dodgy start, but there again, you couldn't get any worse than the last few Uderzo books that came out when he was writing it on his own. So it could only sort of get better. I've been reading that since I was a child. I think that's a great call. I think it's very good. And I literally got in the post, which was very exciting, a few days ago, the Zoop edition, the artist edition of John Paul Leon's Wintermen. Oh, great. Lovely. Yes. He's probably one of my, well, obviously, unfortunately, was one of my favorite comic artists of recent, this, I suppose, of our generation. I absolutely adore his work, and it's got that beautiful illustrative quality, which I sort of try and, that him and say artists like Alex Toth had, which, I try and aspire to and fail dismally at, but hey ho.
I think you're being, fairly self-deprecating there, mate. I don't think
you've
that's true.
Got to do that. You can't be too arrogant.
How about yourself, Si?
The sort of formative stuff for me, I was like, no great surprise. It's a lot of Alan Moore in there. I think for me, V for Vendetta is the more powerful read than Watchmen, which is a little controversial.
I completely agree with that. I agree.
I think Watchmen is the more impressive technical feat, but I think V, maybe it's because of the sort of the British context is just so much more of a gut punch.
It's probably the only half decent Alan Moore film adaptation as well.
Well, I would quietly agree with you. I think perhaps the man himself would disagree.
Alan disagrees with everything that's been adapted, so it's no.
Yeah, they did some the little Benny Hill bit made me smile. But anyway, the book of that is something I could read once a month and never.
And there's a beautiful harmony between like David Lloyd's visuals and Moore's words. I think I would have liked to have seen them work together on more stuff, to be honest.
Yeah. Saga of the Swamp Thing I take out once a year and go all the way through that. It's funny, and like I mentioned Toppy earlier on, so we're quite lucky now that you can get so much of Toppy's oeuvre in the English language, and it's interesting flip-flopping from something like Saga of the Swamp Thing, where Alan was really enjoying using prose as a like this. I keep interrupting myself, but there's a point. We're told show don't tell, and that's generally speaking, not all the time, but generally speaking, that advice. Alan was doing both. He was saying, I will have the artist show you X, and at the same time I will tell you Y, and that's something that's quite unusual even to this day, and I love that approach. And then you go to Topi, who is clearly so much more interested in just drawing extraordinary things, and then sort of grudgingly puts in a slap of text to explain the stuff that he can't be bothered. And it's not like the storytelling isn't always as smooth, but it's always a joy to look at. And I think
sorry to interrupt, but I absolutely adore Toppy as well, and I've got a couple of his originals in the house as well.
Oh, amazing!
And he's a massive influence. But I would say, that I love him just purely illustratively, as opposed to storytellingly. As I've already mentioned my absolute favorite artist, and it's interesting when you talk to us as a team, because you're obviously talking to an artist and a writer, so I will approach it more from the writing side. I'll obviously approach it from the artistic side. So my favorite artist of all time is Alex Toth, for obvious reasons, and Sergio Topi is almost the opposite to Alex Toth in terms of what he does and everything. Alex Toth is almost the pure exercise in absolute focusing on story and minimalism and everything like that, whereas Sergio Topi is kitchen sink and all. He'll put everything into, but he literally puts everything into every single panel, which you could take out a single panel and frame it. There's nothing in that book which is any book he's done ever that is not worth framing, but at detriment to the story, unfortunately. Toppy could almost be read like a Rupert the Bear sort of story, illustration text, speak bubbles, be hanged.
It's really interesting. Like, so on the last week for FPTV, we were talking about the use of narrative text in between panels in Damn Them All. The book I did before this, which is called Step by Bloody Step, has no text at all. And so it's almost, I mean, apart from anything else, that is a really interesting artifact and very beautifully illustrated by Matthias Bergara. So we're talking about storytelling. You literally cannot do a book like that with an artist who doesn't understand storytelling. So that's worth checking out. But it's almost like, from a writery point of view, there's a sort of an annual quota of words. And having spent 6 months doing something with no words, I've come along to damn them all. I'm like, let's put some more words in just to get them out of me. But both approaches work, is the point. There is no one-size-fits-all solution to comics. Comics are, by their very nature, a series of interlocking mechanisms, and they can fit together in profoundly different ways while still making the machine go. That's part of the magic of comics.
I think that's very well said, and I think it's been a great selection. You really caused me to. I haven't read any Sergio Toppi for a long time, and now you've exercised me to go out and pick something up. And I think it's those very interesting selections. Have you guys read The Many Deaths of Layla Starr at all?
Yeah, it's on.
No,
It's a boom book written by Ram V. I would totally recommend it. I would say it's one of the best books of last year, in my humble opinion. But definitely worth checking out. Definitely worth checking. And a stable mate of yours at Boom. But I think we're in kind of. It would seem to me, from somebody who publishes comics, edits them now and again, and retails them, that we're in kind of a golden age at the moment in terms of the quality of output. There is so much good stuff, from both the majors and the independents every month. When I look back, actually, it's very easy to be rose tinted about the past, but I think we're in a far less hit or miss world when it comes to the quality of books at the moment. There's lots of really good stuff every month.
You sense that the indie publishers have realized that there is money to be made in spheres that are separate from what is still in Western comics, American Western comics, the core, which is the sort of shared universe superhero stuff.
Yeah,
I keep waiting for that to no longer be the bread and butter. We sort of thought that maybe digital was going to change all that, and it hasn't really. But it's really heartening to see that there are so many great non-superhero comics. There are still great superhero comics. I'm not against them, but there are so many great non-superhero comics selling really, really well. Some of them even from the big two. They're getting in on the action, which is all to the health of the form, because that can only diversify, it can only increase the quality and the cleverness and also the actioniness, and not every indie comic has to be sharp, cerebral and thoughtful. They can be anything you want them to be, and that's all great. I want to live in a world where people hear the word comics or graphic novels and don't immediately think of one funny little subgenre in the middle of it. They think of a bookstore with 20 different departments, and you can visit each one of them.
Yeah, I think that's supremely well said. It's like, when you say movie business or movies, you don't think of one genre and that's it.
Oh, I don't even like carry-on films.
Yeah, that's right, exactly.
Well, Hannah Berry, who obviously took on the mantle of comics laureate after myself. She had a really good idea. Obviously, it probably will never get implemented, but she said, why don't Waterstones, instead of shelving comics in the comic section, which instantly ghettoizes comics, why don't they shelve them genre-wise? So in the fiction section with all the books, you've got, whatever, not fiction, but in the say crime, you get obviously crime comics. In the fantasy, you get, the majority of superhero comics or whatever, and vice versa. Science fiction, you get the obvious whatever you want to put in there. And it seems the perfect way of debunking the sort of the comics is for kids kind of attitude that we've got in this country. And yes, comics should be for kids. Comics should be read from the age of 4 through to 94. Do you know what I mean? It should be for all. At the minute, it's not for all. It's generally perceived as for a certain age, generally from, well, actually, to be honest, generally from your 30s into your kind of upwards, and a certain type of person, and that's it. That sort of collector mentality. And as Cy was sort of saying, it's we should try and avoid, like to say, that sort of genre stereotyping, of which the Marvel films, as successful as they are, and in a lot of ways are good for us, are equally as bad for us as well, because it's just showing the general public that's all there is, in comics. Here's $1 billion industry telling us that comics, Western comics are all superhero comics.
It also, this is a pub digression, so stop me before I go too far, but especially now having young kids, I increasingly find it difficult to justify to myself, as a creator with any sort of conscience or moral compass, that I present these heroes as that. My kid comes home from nursery saying, "Hero, hero," running around punching stuff. It's like, that's not heroic. You're Hulk smash, that's not actually a good thing. That's a bad thing. And it becomes, I know that it is fantastically more nuanced than that, and it's character specific and all the rest of it, but we are marketing to our children the idea that the aspirational notion of being a hero is tantamount to things exploding. And we all love watching things explode, but let's not tell kids that making them explode is a good thing. Anyway, this is, as I say, that's a rant for a pub, but it does bother me. And
I agree. It's something that's sort of always I've often thought that as well. It's again, not to diverge too much, but one of the things, when I was working on The Walking Dead, to cut a very long story short, what we did with Negan, which was basically to give him salvation, because the obvious thing to do with Negan at the end of the book was to kill him, because that's what he deserved. And you're just thinking, is that a good lesson? To say that basically, and I'm not just talking about Negan, I'm talking about pretty much every villain, whether it's in comic books, television, film, whatever, tends to die at the end of, the story or whatever, which is fine if you've got, if that's necessary or whatever, but sometimes there has to be a rehabilitation.
Right.
And I said to Robert once, and not to take kudos for this, but I will. I said to Robert once at the time, Robert was going to kill Negan, and I said just casually, wouldn't it be kind of cool to not kill him and do this with him? And I remember him replying to me, going, "You bastard! I've got to rewrite this whole script," because he did think it was a really good idea and a good way to take the character forward, and to basically show people that every villain, if they're complex like Negan is, shouldn't just deserve the death sentence at the end of it. And
no mentally healthy individual thinks of themselves as evil. No such thing. And to bring this full circle, to live in a world where the comics industry can support that sort of nuanced, mature approach to everyday morality, rather than this sort of quite simplified two-tone where baddies get offed and goodies celebrate. That's really reassuring. It's sort of, I feel like we're lagging behind other spheres in the world a little bit, but we're getting there. Anyway, the bottom line is more variety in the sorts of stories that you get in comics can only be good, because then there's something for everybody.
I think this is all very true. It's been fascinating listening to you guys talk about that, because of course the narrative in superhero comics is essentially it's all about winning fights, and in real life having a fight is fucking traumatic, right? It's not something that makes you feel good whether you win or lose, and it's not something that people do very often unless you work as a bouncer or you're a boxer or what have you. Fighting is just not the way to sort anything out. Diplomacy and thought is, right? And so what you're saying, I think, is absolutely spot on, and would be a very interesting pub chat, which I want to have with you guys in the future. And thank you.
Said that, superhero comics would be very boring in the last sort of, you know, 50 years.
Yeah, there's no doubt.
Everything was solved by diplomacy.
Yeah.
Spider-Man and the Big Compromise.
Yeah, I suspect Avengers Endgame might not have been as indelible were that to be the case.
They all got around a big table and had a good chat.
Yeah.
On your left.
And I saw the error of his ways.
Well, this has been Charlie Adlard and Simon Spurrier talking about the comics that have influenced them, their favourite comics of the moment. And they are just about to publish issue 1 of Damn Them All, available from the links attached to our conversation, and to sign copies of issue 1 at Forbidden Planet London on the 29th of October at 1 p.m. Gentlemen, it's been an absolute pleasure, and I look forward to seeing you in the store next month. And the book's great, and I can't wait to see how it unfolds.
Brilliant. Cheers. Thank you.
Take care, both of you. See you soon. If you're enjoying watching Forbidden Planet TV and you're enjoying watching us talk to the world's most interesting and accomplished filmmakers, authors, artists, musicians, creators, subscribe right here. See you soon.